knit and crochet designer and the managing editor of the Knitting Circle. And I want to welcome you to today's live event. We use these live events to take some time to typically learn how to make a new project. And I'll show you all the steps that you need to know on how to make our project. So while we're getting started, I wanted to remind everybody that the project for today, there is a download available for you for free, and you will find the link to the download in the description of wherever you're watching this video. And also don't forget that there is a chat box so you can ask me questions about the project. If you have some general knitting questions too, I'll do my best to try to answer those along the way. But if you have your questions, drop them into the chat box. And then also I love, and we've been doing this a lot in the last few videos, if you also want to leave a little comment in the chat box letting us know where you're watching from, maybe if you're currently knitting on something, what you're knitting on while you're watching, even what is your favorite thing to knit, because we do always use that information when I'm deciding on what projects to show in these videos. So today's project is super cute and is something that I've been wanting to make for myself for a long time. So I've made one and now I'm going to share it with all of you. And that is this adorable little mini cactus. So I do have some succulent plants in my house that are not made of yarn, that are real. And I have kept them alive, but I'm not the best at keeping indoor plants alive. And I do love the little like succulents and the cacti that you can get for your house. You know, you can get them from like the hardware store and stuff like that, or, you know, plant store. But I decided this is unkillable. So I thought it would be fun to make one and I wanted to share it with all of you. So like I said, you can download the pattern now if you like, and then you'll have it for when you go to knit your own later. And don't forget also with this video that you're watching right now, you can go back and watch it at any time. So if there's one little part that's a little bit tricky and you're not really sure when you're going to knit your own, you can always come back to this video and watch it again. So now I'm just going to turn my camera down and we'll talk a little bit about what materials we're going to need, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the knitting. Okay, so again, here's my little cactus. So we're just going to need a few supplies, obviously, just sort of the, you know, usual suspects, like I always say. So to start, you're going to need 100 yards of a worsted weight yarn in color A, which I've noted in the pattern is that that is the main color for the cactus. So I just have this acrylic yarn here that I actually had it left over from some other things that I've done here on the Knitting Circle. And I thought it was a pretty good cactus color. So that's my color A, and then color B, which is for the little tiny flower, little detail on the top. You just need 15 yards, and you can see this is definitely some leftovers because my ball's kind of loose here. But that's going to be your color B, which is the contrasting color for the flower. I did look at some pictures of cacti online. And, you know, for me, this was a good color combo. It would also be great to do your flower in a red color. I actually thought it would be kind of cool, even if you wanted to, at the end, when you're done, you could almost even use this as like a little pin cushion or something, you know, and then you could put like your pins in there if you're somebody that likes to sew. That might be kind of cute too, but I just left it alone as a flower. So that's the yarn we're going to need. And then in addition to that, I have listed in the pattern a US size 5, which is a 3.75 millimeter circular needle, and I wrote a 32-inch cable or size required for gauge. Here I just have a 24-inch circular. The reason I specified a circular needle in the pattern is because I knew I would be doing this video, and I am going to knit this using the magic loop method. So I will talk all about knitting in the round using the magic loop method, and we do also have a video on the Knitting Circle about magic loop if you need a little more information, or we even have a class on knitting socks using magic loop. So you could also check that out if you like. But I have noted in the pattern notes with the needle is that I've called for the circular needle because I'm going to show you how to do this in magic loop, but you can use whatever needle configuration you like for small circumference knitting. So that might be double pointed needles or the 2 circular method. You know, they do also make the really short 8 or 9 inch circulars, which might work when you get to like the, I guess, body or the main part of the cactus, but we are starting from the bottom and we are going to have only a very tiny amount of stitches there. So you're going to need double points, magic loop, or 2 circular method at the start of this at least. And then in addition to that, it's just, you know, you use your usual notions, scissors. We'll need a locking stitch marker to mark the beginning of the round. We'll need our yarn needle with a large enough eye for the yarn to go through to weave in our ends. And then in addition to that, we just need a couple of things to make our little mini cactus look like a cactus. So the first thing is a flower pot. You're going to want a flower pot that is 4 inches in diameter across here. I did put a link to the flower pots that I have here. They did come in a pretty big pack on Amazon. But if you think you're going to make a bunch of these, or I also think it'd be fun to crochet some of these, you may want to buy the pack, but any 4-inch in diameter flower pot will work. In addition to that, I did use flower foam, which is not something I've really used before. And this particular foam, again, I got it on Amazon, and I did put the link in the pattern in case you don't know where to buy it. This particular one is actually wet flower foam, which is not necessary for this project. We're not going to get it wet, but that's just what I happened to order. And this is not, it is listed in the materials, but you don't 100% need this. So, if this is something that you don't have and you don't want to feel, and you don't feel like running out to the craft store to get it, you don't really need it. I just used it because I stuck it in the bottom here, like here, you can kind of see it's down here, because that just gave the bottom of this just a little bit more almost like heft. And I felt like then I could just stick my cactus in and it pretty much stays in there pretty tight. But again, you could just stuff it with the polyfill stuffing, which is another thing we are going to need here, which is any kind of polyfill stuffing. This, again, you can get on the craft store, get it at the craft store online. And so you definitely will need this to stuff your cactus with at the end. Again, the flower foam is optional. So we do have some people saying hello. We have Kevin watching from Wales. That's really great. I'm so glad that you could join us. Mary's watching from Springfield, Oregon, and is working on a dog sweater. How cute. Okay, so let's go ahead and just talk a little bit more about our pattern notes and our gauge. So like I said, I made a note about the circular needle because you can use double points if you like, or 2 circulars. And then there's a note about the knit one below stitches we're going to be doing. So I will talk about that when we get there. And of course, like I said, I do have the links for the flower foam and the flower pots if you are looking to use exactly what I used. Now let's talk about gauge. So the gauge is obviously listed in the pattern because the gauge is always listed in every knitting pattern. And so the gauge is listed in stockinette stitch in the round. We're not really blocking this. So really you can kind of start your project and then just measure off the bottom. But you are going to want your gauge to be what I have listed in the pattern or pretty close. Because I have specified that we're going to use this size flower pot. So just know that if you're not getting the same gauge, your cactus might fit in your flower pot a little bit differently. So the other thing you could do also is just knit the cactus, not worry too much about your gauge, and then just find a flower pot that it fits in later. Honestly, that might be what I would do, because I'm not one that I'm like most of you, I don't like to check my gauge really. But I just wanted to make that note that if you're not getting the exact gauge that I listed, then, your cactus is going to look a little different in the flower pot, maybe. Let's see. We have Anna saying hello from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Hello, glad you're here. So let's go ahead and get started on this. Let me find where the beginning of my yarn is here. There we go. Okay. So to start, we're going to just cast on a very small number of stitches, and then we are going to work outward in the round. So this entire thing is worked in the round from the very beginning. So to start, we're just going to cast on 6 stitches here, and you're going to want to leave a pretty long tail because that 6 stitches we're going to join in the round. And so there is going to be a hole. And so we just need a long enough tail to be able to just sort of whip stitch that, that little hole closed at the end, since we're going to be stuffing it. So I'm just starting with the slip knot. I've left a pretty long tail, and I'm just going to cast on 6 stitches using the long tail cast on. Whatever cast on you want to use here really is fine, but I typically just use long tail cast on for things like this. If you need a refresher on the long tail cast on, if that's what you want to use, we do have a video for that on the knitting circle. So here I have my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches. And so now, because I'm going to be knitting using magic loop, I'm going to take half those stitches, which is only 3, and I'm folding my cord to my circular needle in half, and then I'm carefully pulling it through so that I have half my stitches on one needle and half on the other. Now we just need to make sure that we don't accidentally knit with our tail. That's typically when I have to leave a long tail with something like this, that's what tends to happen. And so, especially because this probably was a longer tail than what I really needed. I've got that tail going off to the side. Our working yarn that's going to our ball of yarn is now, I've oriented the needle so it's coming off the back needle, so the one that's furthest away from me, and I'm going to start knitting on this front needle. So to do that, using magic loop, I'm going to pull the back needle out and leaving a loop over here. Now, maybe if you don't know about magic loop, now maybe you're seeing why it's called magic loop. Leaving a loop of the cord still over here, I'm going to bring my needle around like this. So I have a loop of the cord on each side. And I will say, if you have not tried magic loop before, I was so resistant to the magic loop method. I was like, why would anybody do this when you could just use double pointed needles? It's one of those things that, like a lot of things in knitting, it just took a little bit of practice. And especially because I like to knit a lot of socks, for me personally, I found that magic loop actually was the fastest way for me to knit socks. And I know that that's not true for everybody, but for me, I really found that this method of knitting in the round works for me. I use it on just about everything. And I love using it for things even like hats, because then you don't have to switch from your 16-inch circular needle down to double pointed needles when you're decreasing for the top. And it's the same thing here. You know, I mean, in this case, you would just use double points the whole time, but you can just keep going with magic loop, whether we have, 6 stitches to start or the pattern's going to go up to 32 stitches. So now that I have my 3 on the front, 3 on the back, when I'm going to join in the round, I usually put my needle in the first stitch just while I'm getting everything ready. And then now I'm going to go ahead and start round 1. Round 1, we're going to knit into the front and back 6 times, which means we're basically knitting into the front and back every single stitch. So we're going to go from 6 stitches to 12. So to knit into the front and back, I just knit the stitch, move this tail out of the way, going to knit and then come around to the back and knit again. I'm going to do that now 5 more times. So you'll see, let me bring it up here so you can see a little better. So we go into the front of the stitch like a regular knit stitch, knit it, leave the stitch on the left-hand needle, then bring our left needle around to the back to go through that stitch again, through the back, and knit it again. So we worked 2 stitches, but now you can see I already made 4. And we're going to do that all the way around. So knit into the front and back. And this is a common way that you will see this kind of project started, where you're going to just kind of rapidly increase, and then we'll start spreading those increases out a little bit in the subsequent rounds. So we're just knitting into the front and back of each stitch. And usually when I'm personally starting these projects, you'll notice I did not actually place my stitch marker to mark the beginning of the round. And the reason for that is that I just find that it's easier for me to work the first round and then place the stitch marker. And why is that? You need the locking stitch marker when you use magic loop, because You can't really, let me find my stitch marker. Here we go. We can't really take this stitch marker and put this on the needle because it's going to end up just sliding off at some point. So we need to use our locking stitch marker to actually go around some fabric at the beginning. So I tend to just go like right in between here just to mark the beginning of my round. Now you obviously can also just use your tail too. You don't necessarily have to put the stitch marker there, but when I have a small number of stitches, for me, sometimes I find it's hard to use my tail when I don't have that many stitches. For me, I find it sometimes hard to tell if it's on this side or this side. So the stitch marker is going to be your friend here. So now we did round one. So round two is just knitting. And once again, I'm going to make sure I'm not grabbing that tail because that is usually my go-to move here. Okay, there we go. So then we're going to just knit the stitches for round two. Anna says that they have been knitting a couple of decades on and off and currently is back on. Well, I'm so glad that you're back on knitting, and I'm so glad that you're here watching today. I've been knitting also for about 20 years now. And even though knitting is, my job now, I definitely go through periods, even before I was a knitwear designer and this was my job, I definitely went through periods where I was kind of on and off of knitting. Currently, my big craft of choice at this time is I'm really into counted cross stitch right now. So that's what I usually do in the evenings. But yeah, I know how it goes being on and off your craft. So that was round two. So now for round three, we're going to go ahead and do some more increases. So for round three, we're going to do a knit front and back and then knit one. So we're just doing 6 increases every round that we're increasing. And so again, got my working yarn. So we're going to knit into the front and back. And then knit one. Knit into the front and back. Knit one. Knit into the front and back. Knit one. Now, I didn't really show this before, so I've come to the end of the first half of my stitches. I'm going to flip it over. Now we're going to carefully pull this front needle so that our stitches are on it, and then we'll pull the back needle out just like we did before and bring it around. And so you can see that when you're working on your front needle, on your back needle, your stitches are resting there. It's just like resting on the cord. It's almost basically like using a stitch holder or something, but it is your cord. So we're going to continue here with round three. Knit into the front and back. Knit one. Knit into the front and back. Knit one. And knit into the front and back, knit one. That takes care of round three. Round four, I'm going to go ahead and knit all the stitches again. So one thing you might notice as I'm knitting along is that this seems kind of tight. It's a little bit of, I wouldn't say it's a struggle, and I have used a metal needle here. I do like these when I have to knit at a tighter gauge because I just find it's easier to get my needle into the stitches, but we are using a US size 5, which is a 3.75 millimeter needle here. And this is a worsted weight yarn, and the label for this one probably calls for a US size 8, maybe a US size 7. But a worsted weight typically is going to be worked on around a US size 7 to a US size 9. And I'm using a 5 here, which is quite significantly smaller. But the reason is that when you're doing these types of projects, like an amigurumi project, a knitted toy, or in this case, a knitted cactus, you're going to want your fabric to be pretty tight because we're going to have to put that polyfill stuffing in at the end. And if your gauge is too loose, all that stuffing is going to really show through. So you just want to be a little bit careful though, because if you are using the magic loop method, sometimes right here, when you go to push your stitches back up onto the needle, if you've kind of cranked down, this last stitch here can become pretty tight and, can be a little bit harder to get your stitches up on the needle. So that's just something to be aware of since we are at a tighter gauge than we may normally be. Okay, I'm just going to do a couple more rounds here. So now I'm working round 5, which is knit front and back, knit 2, 1, 2. We're just going to do that all the way around. So at the end of this round 5, I will have hopefully 24 stitches. One thing I really like also about the magic loop method, especially for a project like this, is that it's very easy to keep your stitches arranged perfectly so that you have half of your stitches on, one side for the magic loop method and the other half on the other side, because like the stitch counts, all even numbers, everything's either worked in a multiple of 2 or multiple of 4. So it's pretty easy to, you're not having to move really a lot of stitches around, say from the back where the cord is to the front. Sometimes that can happen with certain patterns where you're kind of rearranging your stitches as you go. Let's see here. I don't think I knit into the front and back on that last one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Nope. So let's just unknit these stitches here. We'll just go back. I'll just take this one out fully. So we're going to knit into the front and back. And then knit 2. 1, 2. And it might be a little hard to see here, but let me try to bring that up there. So when you're doing a knit front and back, if you can look at this one in the middle. So you have your knit here. So this is where you've knit into the front, and this is where you've knit into the back. And so you get this little line of your strand of yarn that goes across like this. And so that's how you know you did do an increase here. So see, we have just our regular knit stitch, and then we have this one that's got a little strand going across, then we knit 2, and so on. And you can really use, I'm not going to say any increase, because obviously you wouldn't want to use a yarn over on something that you're going to stuff with polyfill stuffing. But, if you like a different kind of increase, if you like a make one increase, you want to be fancy and use a lifted increase. Well, I always think of lifted increases as being fancy. You definitely can do that. I just use knit front and back because it's easy. This is the bottom of the cactus. So I wasn't extremely worried about, the look of the increase on the bottom of the cactus that's going into the flower pot, but to each their own. So if you like a different increase, use whichever one you like. Just don't use a yarn over, because we are going to stuff this later and you don't want your, your stuffing coming out. So now I'm just knitting around, which is round 6. So I'm going to just sort of make a little mini cactus here today, but you obviously would continue following the pattern as it's written, which would involve a couple more rounds of increasing with rounds of plain knitting in between. So you would continue following the pattern as it's written in the download until you had 32 stitches. But I do want to note that I was thinking about this morning while I was getting ready, that really you can make this cactus with any amount of stitches, more or less. So really you're going to need a multiple of 4 stitches on the needle. So we're going to eventually, when you're making the pattern as written, get to 32, which is a multiple of 4. I've stopped here at 24 stitches, which is a multiple of 4. So you can make this a little bit bigger or smaller if you like, but it comes with a sort of an asterisk next to it. If you are going to change the size of this, that's great. But just know that when you get to the end, when we start decreasing up here, you are going to have to sort of venture out on your own and play around with the decreasing a little bit before you do the flower, because if you don't have the exact same number of stitches listed in the pattern, obviously the number of stitches you have while you're decreasing is going to be changing. And so that'll kind of mess you up. But, you know, if you're an adventurous knitter, you really could adapt this pattern and make a bigger one or a smaller one. I'm a little bit excited that I'm making a smaller one right now. I'm gonna have to go find a tiny little flower pot after this. So after you're at your 32 stitches, you're gonna knit around, and then round 11 will be purling around. So I've just brought my yarn to the front, and now I'm going to go ahead and purl around. And what we're going to do is form this little purl ridge. And if you have watched some of my live videos before, this is a technique I've actually done in another video. When I did the video with the cute little bunny rabbit toy, I used this same technique of forming this little purl ridge. And I do really like doing this on things that are going to have a flat or pretty flat bottom when it comes to the project, because I just think it looks nice. So this is one of those things that, again, if you're adventurous, you don't necessarily have to do it, but I think it looks nice, even though it's going to just be on the inside of our flower pot. But I do like to add this purl ridge whenever I'm doing something knitting where I'm having a flat bottom. I just like the way it looks. So I continued that here, even though we're not going to really see the bottom in the end. So you're just going to, again, make sure you're just following the pattern. And now we've done our purl round. And now we're ready to form that purl ridge round. Now, to do that, we have our purl, but we want our pearls to just stick out a little bit more. So what we're going to do is with our right needle, we're going to pick up a purl bump on the wrong side or inside 2 rows below. So 1 row below would just be our purl stitch. And so 2 rows below will be the last knit stitch. It's a little hard to see on this. Let me just bring it closer to my face and then I'll show you. Okay, got it. So it's a little hard to see here on the first stitch, but it'll be more clear when we get to the second ones. So on the inside of our knitting, because we purled, one row below on the inside looks like a V, like a flat knit stitch. So all you're doing is we're going to be grabbing these purl bumps here and picking them up all the way around. Okay, so all we're going to do is with our right needle, pick up that purl bump, plop it onto the needle, and then we're going to just knit it. My yarn needs to be in the back, so I'm just going to adjust that. And then we're going to knit it together. So basically it's like a knit 2 together. So again, we're going to the next purl bump here, pulling it up, and then knitting it together. And because this is so tight, this round is a little bit slow going. So as you can see, it's just our gauge is so tight that it is going to take just a little bit of time to go all the way around. So I'm just going to keep working on that and forming our purl ridge round. So don't forget, if you have any questions, we're about halfway through here. And we're going to start now working the body of the cactus after this. If you have any questions about this project, or maybe even just knitting amigurumi or toys in general, I'm happy to try to answer any of those for you. Yeah. And if you joined us late, don't forget that we do have a download to this pattern in the description, wherever you are watching. So we're just going to continue all the way around here. So you can see I'm just picking that bump up, picking the bump up, and then knitting it together. So I'm just going to go ahead and knit the rest of these stitches here, but you would continue working the rest of that ridge round as it's written in the pattern. And again, if you do like that detail, I would suggest going to check out the pattern of the bunny that I made. I think I called it Honey Bunny or something. It also uses that same technique so that the little bunny toy would sit flat on a table. So again, you would keep working that ridge round all the way around. And now we're going to be ready to start our actual cactus. So once your ridge round is done, let's go ahead and start our cactus. So to do that, this is really easy. So this, in my opinion, we've kind of gotten through the really hard part of this pattern now, and the rest isn't too bad here. So round one of our cactus is just knit one, purl one all the way around. So to knit one, got the yarn in the back, bring the yarn in between the needles to purl. It's, knit one, purl one ribbing basically is what we're doing here. And you might see some other succulent or cactus like patterns online that do use ribbing for the cactus. I do think it does make it look like a cactus. That ribbing stitch really does. But on round two, we're going to switch it up and we're going to do some knit one belows. And I think that just gives it a little more definition, I think, on the ribbing. I think it makes it look a little more like, it still looks like a knitted cactus, but I think it looks like a little more like a cactus when I added that knit one below in there on round two. So here we are finishing off the second half though of round number one. So we're just going to keep going to the end of the round. And at this point, once I get to the end of the round here, at this point, you may want to move up your stitch marker. I'm going to go ahead and do that when I get to the end here, because now that we have a lot more fabric, I'm starting to feel like this stitch marker, it's not, if I really look, I can tell it's on this side, but just glancing down, it's kind of hard to tell if, that just looks almost like it's in the middle. So don't be afraid to take your stitch marker out when you get to the end of a round and just move it up. And I just go again in between my front and back needles when I'm doing magic loop. And then I know when I'm on this side, that is the beginning of my round. Okay, so now we did our knit one, purl one round. We need to do our knit one below. So on round two, we're going to knit one below, purl one. So it's only on the knits that we have to worry about knitting one below. So to knit one below, it's literally just as it sounds. So normally when you're knitting, you would go into this stitch that's on the needle. Instead, we're going to go into the stitch below by one row, or round in this case. So the stitch that's one round or one row below has a V. We're going to go through the center of that V, make our knit stitch like we normally would, bring it through. And now this might seem scary because you still have this on the needle, but then you're going to just take that off. And what happens is that strand of yarn, again, let me get my other that strand of yarn falls behind. And so on the rounds, when you do a knit one below, you can see here, I have two strands under here on the back side or inside or wrong side, because that stitch that was on the needle sort of fell back down, but it did get caught because it got caught by me making the stitch one row below, if that makes sense. So let's do some more of these and you can see what that looks like. And then again, the purls are just going to be a regular purl. And then the knit one below, we're just going to go, again, not through the stitch on the needle. We're going to go through the center of the stitch one below, which is just through the center of that V, and then knit it, and then take the stitch off the needle. And again, we have two little strands there. And so this becomes a way of being able to read your knitting when you set it down. I tend to try, like on a project like this, I would, because we're going to be repeating rounds 1 and 2 for, several rounds. I think we're going to do a total of 30 or 32 rounds of this. And so I tend to try to stop at the end of a round 2, because we're just going to keep repeating rounds 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. So I usually just try to stop after round 2. So then I know when I'm going to pick it back up, I'm on round 1, but we all know that that doesn't always work out. The phone rings, the dog needs to go outside, your neighbor shows up at the door, whatever, sometimes you just have to put down your knitting in the middle of a round. So that's one way you can check, is that if you're seeing the two strands coming off your stitch, then you know that you just completed a knit one below round, which is round 2, if that makes sense. So we're just going to keep going with our knit one below, purl 1 all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and just do 2 more rounds of this, and then we'll start talking about the decreases. So again, for the pattern itself, it says to repeat rounds 1 and 2 another 15 times. So it's going to be a total of 32 rounds of this ribbing that we're doing. And this is somewhere where you can, obviously you need to have more yarn than what I've listed in the pattern. But if you wanted to make your cactus taller, you could just keep repeating these 2 rounds until your cactus was a little bit taller. You want a little shorter cactus, you can do that too. You know, it's your project. You need to make it how you want to make it. And so you can, this is really a great place where you can adjust the pattern a little bit. Just keep in mind that that is going to change how much yarn you need to use. So I'm just finishing up another round 1, and then I'm going to do another round 2. And I don't know if you might not be able to be picking up on that noise, but because I am using 100% acrylic yarn and knitting it at a tight gauge, and I'm on metal needles, my project's pretty squeaky right now. So, which is something you commonly have happen when you're knitting 100% acrylic yarn at a pretty tight gauge here, like we are. Okay, so that finished another round 1. So let's do one more round 2, and then let's talk decreases. So again, we're not going to go into this stitch. We're just going to go through the center of the V, 1 below, knit, and then take the stitch off. And so it's kind of elongating the stitches. It makes it really squishy. This is actually a really nice ribbing to use on other projects, not just this one. And you'll often see this type of ribbing where you also would be doing some pearls. You would also be doing purl 1 below, but here I just decided to keep the pearls just your regular old purl, I guess, because I felt like keeping all the pearls is just regular pearls. It helps keep the fabric a little bit more dense. I don't know if that's actually true, but I tried it both ways, and I just felt like I thought it looked a little better with just the regular purl ones instead of adding in purl 1 belows. So we're just going to finish this off here. And so again, you would just keep repeating this until you had that 32 rounds total. And at that point, then we will be ready for the next step. There's a few more stitches here. Okay, here we go. We're just finishing this round up. Okay, so once you've finished all of that ribbing, and I don't have a smaller piece of floral foam, but at that point, once you've done your 32 rounds, you can see we're kind of already starting to make almost like a little cup or something. You know, so there's the bottom, here's the top. So the next step would be that we want to sew this hole closed. So let me just grab that tapestry needle, and I'm just going to thread my yarn onto my tapestry needle. This one's a little tight, but it'll work. And we're just going to sew this hole closed. Now, again, this is going inside the flower pot. So I did not do this particularly neatly. I just kind of go across this way. Maybe we'll go back across this way. And then go this way. You could also try to catch the loops of each stitch and pull it closed, whatever method you like to use. The point just is we want to get rid of the hole on the bottom there. So that's looking pretty good. And then I'm going to just poke the yarn through to the inside. And as far as weaving in the end, that's going to be up to you. It's not going to be visible. I still wouldn't, at this point, we didn't weave it in. So I do not recommend trimming it all the way you know, down to your fabric, but you know, I still have a pretty long tail here, but I can cut some of it off and just leave it on the inside. So now that the tail, you know, we've sewed that hole closed and then we have dealt with our little tail onto the inside, you would take your floral foam. Again, I have still just the bigger piece here, and this will just slide right down into your fabric. So again, you can see on this one, here's where my floral foam is, like right there. So I just stuck it in and just shoved it down until it was at the bottom. And again, that is optional. If you don't want to go out and get one of these, or you can't find like the circular hockey puck kind, that's okay. You do not need it. Again, I just thought it would be nice so that it would sort of fill out the pot a little bit more, but it's up to you. So you would put your floral foam in, and at that point, we'll be ready to start the decreases. So the decreases is where that note at the beginning of the pattern about keeping an eye on your knit one belows. This is where it's going to apply, because we're going to do a knit one below, you'll see, on stitches that we had decreased on the previous round. So we're just going to want to take a little care. So for round one, for our little decreases, is we're going to do SSK. So an SSK is slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, bring your left needle back into the stitches and orient it so you can knit those 2 stitches through their back loops. So we took 2 stitches and turned it into 1, then knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, knit 2 together, which is just, I'm going to go back because I just did that without even thinking. So to knit 2 stitches together, we're just going to go into the next 2 stitches from left to right like that and knit them together as if they are a single stitch to make 1 stitch. So that's a decrease, and then a purl 1. And now we're going to keep repeating that all the way around. So the decrease rounds are going to be decreasing your cactus by 8 stitches every decrease round. So again, SSK. The way I showed you the SSK on this first one is the way that you traditionally do an SSK. I like to do my SSKs as slip as if to knit, slip as if to purl, and then insert my needle and knit them together through the back. That was just something I learned a long time ago. And when I'm knitting lace, especially, I think the SSKs, and the reason when I learned it, this is what I learned it from Meg Swanson. So, you know, if you've been a knitter for a long time, you may know that Meg Swanson is, you know, a prolific knitter. Her mom was Elizabeth Zimmerman, which is like the ultimate prolific knitter that we've known. So I learned it from her in a class. So I feel like it's a legit tip, and I do really like it. And so let's see, we got a knit 1, knit 2 together, purl 1. But anyway, as I was saying, I kind of went on a tangent there, that when you're using the particular decrease, the SSK in lace especially, it looks a little bit flatter and a little bit more like a knit 2 together, or like the mirror image of a knit 2 together when you're working lace. So I'll show you my SSK again. That's slip as if to knit, slip as if to purl, and then knit them together through the back loops. Not necessary for this project, but since I always do my SSKs like that, I thought I'd bring it up, because sometimes when I'm doing these videos, people catch me doing it and then they ask. So I tried to remember to talk about it this time. Okay, so that finished off round 1. Again, that decreased by 8 stitches. And then round 2, and the decreases you have to start, or for the decreasing portion of this pattern, you need to pay a little bit close attention, because I wanted the decreases to sort of flow up nicely here. And so now we're going to have to do some knit 1 below, like 2 in a row. We're going to have to do 2 knit 1 belows in a row. There we go. And so you're just going to want to make sure that you're very closely following the pattern. And it's really sort of a knit the knit, purl the purl situation, except on this round, we'll be using knit 1 below. So here we're going to knit 1 below, and we had done an SSK here, I believe. Let me double check. Yep. So when we're going to knit 1 below, right, we've learned now we're going to stick our needle in through the center of that stitch 1 below. but there's 2 stitches there because we had done the SSK. So you just want to make sure you're not only going through one of them. You want to make sure that you've gone through both. And I mean, it's pretty obvious, but it was something I noticed while I was knitting along that I needed to keep my eye on, that I was making sure to get through both of those because you don't want anything to fall down. So there we go. So then we do another knit 1 below and then a purl 1. And we're going to just do that all the way around. So knit 1 below twice. Here's where we had the knit 2 together. And I feel like it was on this one where I wasn't always catching both stitches. I don't know why. I think maybe just because of the way that it leans, but you want to make sure that you're getting through both of those stitches from that knit 2 together when you're doing that knit 1 below. And so we're going to do that all the way around. And so you would just keep working the decreases of this pattern as written. And eventually we're going to get to 8 stitches. I just purled there instead of knitting below. Here we go. And again, this is another one of those rows. I feel like the rounds after the decrease rounds, it is a little bit slower just because you are trying to take care that you're working those knit 1 belows properly on those decreased stitches. So, but we don't want anything to unravel. So, okay, so we're almost done here. And purl and knit 1 below twice. That's 1. And this is again the knit 2 together. I'm making sure I'm grabbing both and pulling it through. And now because we're at a tight gauge and we went through decreases, notice I've kind of got this this little loopy guy right here. So I also was finding it good to take a little pause after some of these and just tug on the fabric a little. Obviously, I never really want to crank down on my knitting that much, but just sort of give it a little tug so that way this can kind of just all fall back behind it on those knit 1 belows. Again, that's not something you would probably experience just on a normal knit 1 below situation with decreases. I think that it's more of we're knitting at a pretty tight gauge. And so, that's gonna affect how this is going. So you would just keep following the pattern as it's written, and then you're going to just keep decreasing, and then ultimately we are going to have, let me see here, I just need to scroll here, we need to get to 8 stitches. So I'm just gonna work a little decrease round here on my little sample, but again, you would just keep following the pattern as it's written until you got to the right number of stitches. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I probably should do some more decreases here than what I'm doing to get to the 8, because we want to get to the 8 so I can show you how to do the flower. Maybe we're just going to kind of do a little knits. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Four. So for the actual pattern, let's see, your decreases, it is just going to be, it's going to be a total of 6 rounds of decreases. Again, I have to kind of go off on my own here, which again, if you're changing the size of your cactus, this is where, and you're putting more stitches on to begin with, you may need to sort of do what I'm doing here and just, kind of wing it. Okay, so let's see, we're going to just do one more round and get to our 8 stitches. But before we do that, let me stop. So before we do that, remember your flower or your floral foam is going to be inside here. At this point, you want to take some of your polyfill stuffing and start stuffing this, because even though we have more rounds to work, the hole's going to get kind of small, and then it's going to be harder to stuff your stuffing in there. So there we go. So we're just going to stuff it a little bit and keep on going. And you can always shove more in there. You can always, use your knitting needle, or my bag of polyfill stuffing actually came with like a little stick. So you could always use that to poke it down, whatever you need to do. Okay, so we're just going to decrease until we have our little 8 stitches. Mine just looks like a little cactus ball. It's so cute. It's gonna be really cute. I can't wait to find just like the tiniest little flower pot for this one. I guess I could even try to knit a flower pot. That's an idea too, or crochet one. Okay, so here we go. So you will follow the pattern until you have your 8 stitches left. Now we're ready to break color A, which is our main color that we've been using. So that's just, we're going to cut that with the scissors. And then we're going to go ahead and add in our color B, which again, I just kind of have this very loose ball of the pink left over from some other projects too, which is, again, I just used like the leftovers on the top because we really don't need that much for the flower because it's only a few little rounds. Okay, so I'm just going to get my needle set up just like I have been with the magic loop. And so to switch colors, this is a question we get a lot here at the Knitting Circle. To switch colors, really, it's just as simple as starting to knit with the new color. You can, if you want, tie a little overhand knot here or something, or just to hold them together. I personally never worry about that, and I don't feel any particular way about if you put knots in your knitting or not, because it's your knitting. So if you want to put knots in your knitting, go ahead and go for it. But I typically don't. I typically, when I'm just starting a new color, we'll have our tail, and we don't really need that long of a tail here. I fold it over just like that. So it's kind of an upside down U. And then, so I basically pinch it to make a loop. And then I've inserted my needle into this stitch and I just stick it on there and then pull it through. And then if you need to adjust your tail, you can just, pull on the tail, pull on the working yarn, and we're ready to go. For this start though, I did take the stitch off the left needle, but we're going to be knitting into the front and back all the way around. So we're kind of now in a way almost starting over. This is what we were doing at the very beginning of our little cactus, where we were doing all these knit front and backs to increase. And again, it's just to make this little flower on the top. So you would continue, of course, to follow the pattern. And we are going to be working a little bit of seed stitch for the top of this flower. I just felt like, I wasn't going to put pins in it or do anything to make it actually spiky. And so I thought it might be nice to add a little bit of texture with some seed stitch, just to give it a little more interest. But again, your cactus, if you don't want to do that, you could just ignore all the knit one, purl one business in the flower and just make it all knit stitches. That completely works too. But let's go ahead and do maybe a round of the seed stitch here. So, with the seed stitch, it really is more or less what we've already been doing. We're just going to be either starting with, we're either going to be just doing a purl one, knit one, or all the way around, or knit one, purl one all the way around. So round 2 started with a purl. So it's going to be purl one, knit one all the way around. When I'm doing magic loop, when I'm going to start a purl, so we've had our yarn back here, I always like to, I don't know why. It's just for me in my brain, it makes sense, but maybe you have a hard time with this too. When I'm doing magic loop, I just like to hold my needles like this and then bring the yarn in the front like I'm in a purl. And then that always gets my yarn. Usually, I mean, sometimes I mess that up, but that helps me because otherwise I end up catching my yarn in this loop, which isn't a problem. When you get back over to this side, then your yarn will be free again. But that's just my way because of keeping my yarn, I guess, organized while I'm doing magic loop. Because especially when I start with a purl, I have a tendency to catch my yarn, just like have the strand of yarn going through the loop here. And it could just be a little annoying depending on the project. Another option, I think, for this particular pattern, as far as the flower goes, is if you have some leftover yarn that has a nice halo to it, you've got like maybe some mohair or Angora yarn, that might be a really fun way to use up some stash or use up some leftovers. And the yarn gives it that little halo. And so it will almost kind of look a little spiky or something on the flower, which I think could be nice. Okay, I'm just gonna work one more round here and then we'll talk about the decreases really quick and the rest of our pattern. Okay, so I'm knitting here. Yeah, see, so the yarn was in the front here because I'm purling. So this is where you want to just be a little bit careful, because if I start knitting here, now I'm just bringing the yarn over this cord, which again, isn't a really big deal, but you might end up treating that like an extra stitch and forgetting to let it go. So when you're doing the magic loop, it's always good just to take just that half a second to make sure that your yarn's in the right place. And again, if you are not a magic loop fan, but you want to be a magic loop fan, I encourage you to check out some of the videos on our website, as well as maybe even that class on socks, because you can use the techniques from the sock class to do anything magic loop, really. Okay, so once you have done the pattern as written, we're just going to be finishing it off here. We've got one, you would have one more round and we're going to purl two together. So we're going to insert our needle into the next two stitches as if to purl, bring it to the back, yarn to the back, knit two together. And we're going to do that all the way around. And then that'll be, again, there'll be one more decreasing round on the full size pattern. But yeah, you'll just keep following what the pattern says to do. Oh, look, see, I talked about not messing this up and then I still messed it up, probably because I was talking about it. So let's see. All right, so here I did make the stitch where the yarn came over the needle. So I'm just going to take that out. Here we go. So we've kind of dropped this stitch. And so we'll just fix that. And that's something too, honestly, I might even just try to knit it together on the next round. I'm somebody, I don't like to undo my knitting a lot if I can avoid it. So there's always a fix, right? So here we go, purl and knit. And purl two together. And knit two together. Okay, so we're really almost done here. We're getting very close to the end of our time, but we just got a couple quick little steps to finish up. So now we're done. So we can go ahead and cut our yarn, and we're going to just thread our little tapestry yarn onto our tapestry needle. There we go. And then I finished this off like a hat. So to start, we're going to take a little bit more. You'll take a little bit more of that polyfill stuffing. You don't need a lot of it here, and especially I don't, because I just have this tiny one. We can stuff it in here. And you remember, like, this is not totally closed between your cactus and your flower. So, you can stuff more down into your cactus at this point if you need to. It's just that hole there is pretty small. You'd also want to Make sure that your ends in here are secure, just so that they don't come out. So you would likely want to weave those ones in just a little bit too before you put the stuffing in. Now we're going to finish it off like a hat. You have your yarn on the needle, on your tapestry needle, and you're just going to run that needle through your stitches. Here we go. Got one needle free. Go through the other one. You have your other needle free. And we can pull this all through. And at this point, if you need to do any adjusting, you can. If you need to, like over here where we join the yarn, we could get the tail and this tail right there. So I can tighten this up, and then at this point, weave this one in. When you're weaving in the ends and everything's already closed up, I just want to say this quickly before we go, is that you'll just take your yarn needle into the inside of your project and then come out the other side. And just be careful that you don't accidentally lose your yarn needle in the middle of your project, because it is all, you know, enclosed now. And then we're just gonna, I pull the yarn tail tight. And then when I cut it, it just, and I let go of that tension, it just gets sucked right up into the inside of your cactus. So I have this tiny little one right here. Look how cute, but you'll have one that looks like this, just like that. So that's it. And then once you've done that, it's just literally ready. Just stick it in your flower pot. You could probably glue this in if you wanted to. You know, if you didn't want it to come out, you could, you know, put a little craft glue. I don't know what this particular flower pot, this is pretty, this seems like pretty inexpensive plastic. So I'm not sure if I would take the hot glue gun to this. I don't know. I'd maybe have to test that first, but you could, you know, put some craft glue or something in here if you wanted it to be more permanent. But that's it. So if you decide to make one of these, I would love to see it on social media. So don't forget that we have a Facebook group that you can join, and our group is growing every day. And so you can go there and post any kind of knitting project that you are working on, including maybe the mini cactus. And of course, you can always tag us on social media. We have the Facebook page, of course. We are on Instagram. We're even on TikTok. So if you do make one, be sure to tag us in your photos, because we would love to see it. So that's it for me for today. Thank you so much for joining me for today's live. I really loved making this project, and I really hope that you enjoy making it too. And I can't wait to see all of your cute little knitted succulents. I'll see you guys again soon. Happy knitting.